How many of you have ever heard this saying that real loving relationships are 50-50? Any of you ever heard that saying before? The idea, in other words, I'll meet you halfway. For us to have a really healthy relationship, it's give and take. Have you ever heard that before? It's give and take. For us to have a really healthy relationship, it's 50-50. We meet halfway, we meet in the middle. It's give and take. In other words, I'm willing to invest in this relationship, but I also have to look out for me. I can't expect to keep giving and giving and giving and giving and never receive anything back. It's not healthy. Sounds really good and convincing, doesn't it? I'm not going to do a show of hands to see how many of you already have bought into that philosophy, but I want to ask you, do you realize what a flawed sense of thinking that is? Let me just play this out for you. Who in their right mind would look at their loved one, their spouse, their husband, their wife, whoever it is, their kids, and say to them, I only want half of the love that you have to give. That's all I want. That's all I expect from you. I just want 50%. Of what you have to give. I realize that you have to take the other half of your energy and make sure that you're looking out for yourself. Make sure that your own needs are being met. And I have to do the same thing. I have to look out for myself. So if we can just invest in this relationship 50-50, if we can have a little give and take here, you give some, take some, I'll give some, take some, then our relationship will be okay. So you only have to give me half of the love you have to give. That's all I expect of you. Sounds pretty ridiculous, doesn't it? Who in their right mind would approach their loved one and actually say that? No, I want, selfishly speaking, I want all the love that my loved one has to give. But I also have to realize that they deserve all the love that I have to get. It isn't about me. Love isn't about me. Love isn't selfish. Love isn't self-seeking. Real loving relationships are not 50-50 relationships, but 100-100 relationships. Okay? Real loving relationships aren't give and take, they're give and give. Does that make sense? In other words, I love this person so much that I don't care if I ever get anything in return from them. I'm going to give them everything that I have. I'm going to give them 100% of my love. But do you realize a fascinating thing happens because this whole 50-50 give and take concept of love, it's really like, okay, I'm going to give some, but I'm also going to look out for me. There's going to be a bit of looking out for myself in this, and that's in order to see that my needs get met. But do you realize when two people come together with this approach that it's give and give, that it's 100-100, that I'm going to give you all of myself to you, and then another person comes and says, I'm going to give all of myself back to you, what happens? Your needs are met in far greater ways than they ever could be if you held something back in order to make sure you were looking out for yourself. I mean, isn't that fascinating? Like the whole notion of a 50-50 relationship is that I'm going to give some, but I'm also going to get some in return. And so we hold something back from fully engaging in this loving relationship in order that I can make sure that my needs are met. And what happens is what you see all around us in the world. I mean, I think the divorce rate in our world speaks volumes to this notion of 50-50 relationships and how much they work. Because if it's about you, that's not the place to begin. That's not even what love is about. It's about fully investing. And what happens when two people invest 100% in each other to say, look, my only concern is that I'm going to take care of the needs of my wife, and I'm going to give her everything she deserves, regardless of how she responds to me. She doesn't ever have to give me anything in return. But I know that she loves me as well, and when she approaches that relationship in the same light and says, look, the one thing I'm going to do is give him everything that I can. And all of a sudden, man, our needs are being met, and we don't even have to look out for ourselves because we're truly loving and truly being loved. But I want to say this, not only is this idea a flawed sense of thinking, it's not the way that God has taught us to love, and that's the bigger deal for us as Christians. Nor is it the example that He's set for us to follow. As we talked about last week, the ultimate example of God's love was given to us in the person of Jesus Christ. And as the scriptures tell us in Romans Chapter 5 and verse 8, it says, God demonstrates His own love for us in this, that while we were still sinners, Christ died for us. So out of sheer love for us, he gave 100% of himself before we ever loved him back. And in spite of the fact that we still sometimes don't do a very good job of loving him back. And yet he loves us with a perfect love and unending love. I want to tell you today that God could never love you any more than what he does today. He loves you to the maximum capacity already, and he could never love you any less. God's love is perfect, and this is the love that we are called to follow. This is the example that is set for us. The scriptures actually teach us. See this love that God represents, that God presents to us in the person of Jesus Christ? The scriptures teach us love like that. Love like that. This is the example that's set for us. But we have this struggle with our own human nature, our own selfishness, this carnal part of our human being that's selfish. But not only is that part of the struggle, this human nature that we have to deal with, not only is that working against us, we also live in one of the most materialistic, self-seeking cultures in all the world. And I hate to tell you, but man, that works against us in a lot of ways. We're really blessed. We have a lot of great things, and we should be thankful for those things. But in a lot of ways, man, when I hear stories from the Christians that are coming out of the churches in persecuted countries and the amazing things that God is doing in their midst, I can't help but think, man, what could be our greatest blessing could also be our greatest curse, because we're missing out on so much, because it's so much about us. We live in a culture that says everyone deserves to live the American dream, the pursuit of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. But you have to go out and get it for yourself. Nobody's just going to hand it to you. And so we teach people to be self-seeking. It's all about me. It's all about climbing the corporate ladder of success, getting whatever I can get, whatever I can do to be successful, that everybody's got to have a home, that a house that they own, that everybody's got to have this, that, and the other thing, that this is what it means to be an American. And so we live in a culture that teaches us to be self-seeking. So not only do we have our own human nature that's already got that inside of us, we live in a culture that just kind of multiplies that and magnifies that. As we examine this topic further this morning, I want to spend the bulk of our time in Philippians chapter 2. You can actually turn in your Bibles there if you want to follow along with us. It'll be up on the screen as well. But before we dig in and read this passage from Philippians chapter 2, I want to give you just a little background information on the book of Philippians, because I think it says something to the relevance of this passage to us here in this place today. I think a lot of times when we look at different passages and things in the Bible, it's easy to think, man, this stuff was written several thousand years ago to a totally different group of people in a totally different culture. I'm not really sure that this stuff really speaks to me here in this place today, to what I'm going through. So I want to give you a little background, because I think it's going to help you see the relevance of this particular passage to us here in this place, here in this time. So the book of Philippians is written as a personal letter from the Apostle Paul to the church at the city of Philippi. Back then they didn't have 60-some different churches in a city like we do in the city of Tracy. They had the church at the city of Philippi that all came together in that city and followed what they called the way, which was following Jesus and his way and his teaching. And so Paul wrote this letter to the church at the city of Philippi. Now, Philippi was a city that was established by Alexander the Great. Anybody ever heard of Alexander the Great? Good. This city was established by Alexander the Great in honor of his father, Philip II of Macedon, thus the name Philippi. He named it after his father. Alexander the Great came onto the scene actually just a few hundred years before Jesus came on the scene. So we're talking just a couple hundred years, which in the scheme of things isn't a lot of time. And he's known most for his conquest of that portion of the world which established the Roman Empire, which is one of the greatest empires in all of history.